that the telecommunication company have improved. Telecommunication company improved on their service delivery, poor network, which Nigeria have been yearning for in years before embarking on the increase in tariff.
A brief debate for and against the motion ensues, and it is eventually adopted.
The last increase was done over a decade, over 10 years. And for somebody like I just said, coming from private sector, how do we expect them to increase their performance? Knowing that prices of virtually all the various indices have increased.
We are not saying tariff should not be brought in, but not now. Let the telecom industry tell our people, let them show to us that what the people should be paying for is being given to them.
Well, that was a debate that ensued in the House of Reps yesterday with regards to the tariff increase for telecom services, which has already been approved by the National Communications Commission. But that is still sparking a debate. To be or not to be, the NCC has already approved a 50% tariff increase. The question now is, what will be the effect of the debate that members of the House of Reps are having? Because they want this to be they want it to be on hold. You heard voices for and against. Well, this morning we're going to be getting another perspective of the matter, and Mr. Bosun Ayeni, who's a tech expert and also the CEO of Compumetric, is here with us in our Abuja studios. It's good to see you in person, not on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians. It's good to see you as well.
Yes, so here we are. This conversation is still ongoing. We're wondering, I thought they had already been implemented. Is this not medicine after death?
Absolutely, it's medicine after death. You would recall when the initial announcement broke through, there are a couple of reactions, and the loudest voice perhaps was the Nigeria Labour Congress.
Yeah, that's they're going to go
on strike, yeah. And of course all that now is behind us. So I reckon that the debate at the assembly too would be managed. And
managed?
Managed, and it will be behind us. It has to be managed. I mean, the National Assembly cannot speak and they will be ignored. The National Assembly cannot pass resolution and they will not be engaged.
So, I'm a little skeptical when you use the word managed.
Managed by concerns. Well, the stakeholders, I'm sure the ministry will talk to them. I'm sure the Alton and the stakeholders will engage them, respond to their requests, provide clarification. And at the end of the day, the tariff will go through.
What I'm a little curious about is the reports we're now beginning to see, and I don't know if this has been confirmed. I mean, I'm not able, even though, yes, everyone is affected by this tariff increase. Yeah. I'm unable to confirm now if this is true because of how I use my own data and how I use my own credits as well, as to how, yes, 50% was what was approved for by NCC, but some people are alleging that far much more is being charged by the telcos.
Yes, absolutely. The allegation is out there and it's somewhat real.
It's somewhat real.
Yeah, the first thing is that the telco themselves will acknowledge, and a couple of their top executives, if you talk to them, that the pricing mechanism is not as simple as it appears. So when they have to, and the policy trust of this administration, not wanting to increase price on the poor, is also being reflected in the pattern of pricing that the telcos are adjusting. So they are not making big increase on the lower level tariffs, so the 1 gig, the 2 gig. But those who do heavy lifting subscriptions are likely to see, and they are seeing, a much steeper increase in price, at least from the early stage changes we're seeing.
Oh, so it's graded as well?
Yes, so they are not applying the same
in the lower category. I'm not seeing it that clearly.
I don't think so. But, they are definitely not applying the same rate across board. And if you watch what NCC said to them, it says a maximum of 50%. But the real issue here is that people are now alleging that MTN particularly was called out, that I've done an increase that's more than 50%. So it's important to look into that very closely. From the data and the allegations out there, On face value, it appears to be true. But of course, professionals like us need to really look at it, do subscriptions, confirm the actual increase, and be indeed certain that this increase is what it is. But initial reaction out there is that a few of them have gone beyond the 50% threshold. But I would expect that NCC would correct that if that's the case.
Well, the House of Reps is actually saying that this should be put on hold. That's what they want. They want the implementation to be put on hold. How feasible is that?
Well, I mean, it's feasible. If everyone agrees to put it on hold, it will be put on hold. I'm sure if they insist that it should be put on hold, the operators will demand other waivers, other consideration to achieve their cost goals. At the end of the day, for a business, it's either you increase your revenue or you reduce your cost. So I'm sure which is unlikely, if the government says, oh, for this year, we will waive all your regulatory licenses, we'll waive all your, this payment and that, will waive all the mast fees you need to pay. The telcos can look at it. Okay, now you're talking. We can wait a few more months. But my view and my position is that an increase is imminent, and an increase is somewhat deserving. The telcos have, the reason why I'm even having this debate is because telco is regulated. If it was not regulated, there would have been an increase since last year. Malpa, you guys travel all the time. The hotels you stay, the prices are up. The airlines, the prices are up. Everything that is not as regulated from a pricing perspective have already since adjusted prices, and we've adjusted to the prices and moved on. So the regulated guys are now facing a scenario where the lagging time for getting approval for their price change is now being faced with a lot of resistance, given that people have been hit by those services that are not regulated. So the increase should be allowed. However, the two things for me that my position would be a 50% single increase in an instance might not be and should not be the best way to handle it. The second thing is that the the regulators and the ministry should, on behalf of Nigerians, demand certain market interventions that would make life a bit more convenient for people to be able to handle the price changes.
Well, quite a number of things are just, swirling in my head, because as you were speaking, I was just asking and wondering, if this is what Nigerians can handle, really. It's a lot to take on almost every front. As you said, there have been so many increases, and of course, many businesses have had to adjust correspondingly. But when you look at incomes, and that's where the NLC, was really taking an issue with, all of these increases, that when you look at what it is that people are taking home, it's nothing compared with what they have to contend with. How do you think that, consumers can cope with all of this?
Well, the income parity is a big challenge for Nigeria. If we even compare that with what happens in most of Africa, talk less of more developed countries. First, these prices we are seeing are now global competitive level pricing. So this 50% goes through. It takes 1 gig average data price in Nigeria to the same level as what you will pay in the UK. And it takes it to the same level as what's happening in Kenya. Just a few countries in Africa would be just a notch or two higher than Nigeria. And if you compare this with the trajectory that the Nigeria economy is going in terms of population, growth pattern, country mix in terms of religion and all of that, if you follow the patterns of countries like India, Philippines, and Pakistan and all those kind of countries, we are already far more expensive than what they are paying. So it is what it is. Nigeria is different. We need to look at what we need to deal with. And that is why when Labour is agitating, if you ask me, Labour should more constrain their argument to the salary compensation fee structure for people to be able to cope. So what I think Labour needs to do is they need to engage government. They don't have to wait for the next 4 years or 5 years for their cycle of salary, minimum wage
They just
reduction.
had one last year.
Yeah, they can't wait. They can't wait for 5 years. Look, it's going to impact us. I'm an employer of labor, private sector. We are constantly looking at what we pay our people and having to do adjustment. I'm still having those kind of debates in my organization. So if government does a new adjustment in a year or so, which I think is necessary, then people like us would also have to adjust. But at the end, the service, these fees are passed to people. You know, it's a famous American president that says that at the end of the day, companies don't pay taxes. It's citizens that pay the taxes. So at the end of the day, big corporations will find a way to pass on their fees, their costs, their taxes to the citizens. Those who cannot would reduce their income, and then perhaps a few would fold up because they can't cope with the economic situation. But it's not all gloom. If you look at what's happening in the country in terms of tariffs and all of that, the telco sector, even if you focus on that, if we then bring in what's happening with CBN and ATM fee adjustment, you know, there are certain wins that we have seen. And the telecom sector, for example, one of the quick wins we saw in that sector in the first 5 years is human capacity. Nigerians are providing services in telecoms all over the world, Middle East, a lot of places, MTN and all of the telcos that were able to ramp up skills and use a lot of Nigerians who stepped up in the early 2000s to provide competent services. Have been exported to different parts of the world, providing these skills and been working as expatriates and contributing obviously to remittances. To the country. So, and the value chain in the country as well is something that has been quite remarkable in terms of GDP contribution and people able to just fend for themselves. I know this is something different, but you cannot look at the success, for example, in the payment space without telecom services, because everything rides on communication. Almost everything in the fintech payment space rides on communication. So there are wins, there are successes, but how do we sustain that? How do we ensure that people are able to cope with the tariff changes? The reason people are not screaming in Nigeria, to be honest, is that the people who are still earning more than what they need to spend in terms of have a little bit of disposable income are facing more and more pressures, having to support more and more people. And that is something that is not captured in the economic calculation. So when people say economics theories fail in Nigeria, it's not true. It's just that there are components to the equation that the analysts do not capture, do not put into consideration in arriving at their position. And it's huge. The government lately have been talking about foreign direct investment, foreign direct inflow remittances. And they're saying barely about 10% of remittances is captured when they do the calculation. But now they've zoomed in on it, looked at it, tried to understand how else do people handle remittances. And it's becoming clear that when you do the numbers in Nigeria, they don't reflect the true situation because the input values you're putting into those equations are wrong. It's not that the economics principles don't work in Nigeria.
The input value, in what sense precisely? Is it that we're not seeing all of it, or people are using other sources, or they're using what precisely are we not seeing clearly?
Both. So if you look at disposable income or employment rate in the country, the people would, of course, it was just adjusted recently, but there are so many people in Nigeria that don't have a job or they're underemployed, but they are spending 3-4 times their salaries. That difference is coming from somebody. It's coming from somewhere, which is able to keep them afloat. Now, that extra income they get is not captured in this computation. And this is where, for example, the challenge comes in. Like the Economic Reform Committee of the government have acknowledged, for example, that they are going to be working on foreign remittances.
Yeah, foreign remittances is one. When you just talked about other sources of income for Nigerians, I was going to ask, have we taken also into cognizance, I hate to say this, but it's a reality, the economy of corruption and its influence, its impact on our economy as well, perhaps not giving us the true state of things?
It is a factor. Corruption is in every country, but if you look at it relative to the size of our economy, we were up there, obviously, from also several indicators among most corrupt countries that global reports have declared. So if you then look at those numbers, corruptly earned money going into all sort of investment and private spending and all of that, and most times they are not, again, captured as part of the total economic, they are not accounted for. So there are several of these indicators. Yes, if you were to do something a bit more accurate, one would expect a good economics or someone doing any AI computation to estimate different values and look at different scenarios and assume that if this different other variables at these values, what's the impact? And then you can carry out a proper research to be able to tell, a more accurate prediction of what these values are and then what their impact are on all of this. But certainly, going forward, more changes, more increases will come across different services, and Nigerians, we need to further tighten our belts to be able to cope.
You made reference to the CBN hikes on ATM usage, ATM charges, which has now been upped to 100 naira for every 20,000 naira. That came with some uproar, but some people say it's a misunderstanding that what the CBN is trying to do is break the monopoly of POS operators. I don't know if you see any sense in that sort of analysis. What precisely is going on here? Why is the CBN getting involved in ATM charges?
Well, first things first, let's clarify that the CBN have always been involved in ATM charges. Mm-hmm. And early 2000, thereabout, when ATM as we now know it was introduced on a large scale in Nigeria. And I think we have to give credit, I'll have to mention them, to a company like IntoSwitch. The today's online, real-time, large-scale ATM deployment was made, possible by the work they did. Of course, before that, there have been ATMs in the economy, very little quantity, mostly offline or mostly bank branch only, and so on. Now, at that time, when the fee was being fixed for withdrawals on an ATM, even then, early 2000, mid-2000, it was fixed at 100 naira per transaction at that time. And I remember very clearly the CEO of IntoSwitch making a case for why it has to be 100 naira. The argument then was that for the convenience of putting a machine close to you where you don't have to travel to the next bank branch and pay the transportation cost, 100 naira just seemed like a fair fee to charge. Sometimes in technology, regulation lag behind technology. So that was the case at that time. So the 100 naira wasn't really a CBN imposed fee at the time. And it was also a fee that was shared and structured among the stakeholder, issuer, acquirer, and the switch. So they kind of split this revenue. So now what CBN is doing, truth be told, is that CBN is trying to correct its own policy. I won't say revert itself, but I'll call it a correction. Now, the correction is what we are seeing. And if you compare the role the banks are playing versus the role the telcos are playing with NCC, the banks are lining up very squarely behind CBN, allowing CBN do all the talking. But this charge is clearly to protect the bank as against mobile money operator or just PSSP or people who have agency banking licenses who are cashing in on the current charges for POS, cash in, cash out operation that we see in the market. Now, banks...
Sorry, are you saying that there's been no incentive for banks to make sure that money has been available in ATM machines? Because that has been a very big issue for some time now.
Absolutely. When banks rolled out ATM initially, the use cases, the business case you will see a bank make then would be invest in ATM, and they actually did, rolled out a lot of ATMs, about 16,000 or so in the country, active, according to, I think, CBN. Now, the banks were making the case at that time to, 1, decongest the banking hall, 2, acquire new customers, 3, just make it more convenient, reduce their own costs of handling cash and so on and so forth. So that was sufficient case. And if you look at the fees they were charging at that time, for most banks, they run ATM productivity accounting for each ATM and for branches. And most of their ATMs, when the cashless policy was not imposed, were making profit. So what has happened over time is that CBN policies, first on cashless policy has affected the banks and the productivity of ATMs. First, the banks are compelled to limit the amount of money they dispense on ATMs. In those days, around 2010, people will go to ATM and withdraw 200,000, 400,000, 500,000. They then go into the bank in all. And if you do it on a bank branch, on us, what they call on us. So I have a First Bank card, I go to First Bank ATM. With those limits, it's even free. But today, you can't do that level of withdrawal because of cashless policy. Now, the challenge on the flip side is that POS operators, in most cases, allow people to do high volume transactions. CBN have tried to correct those policies, but they continue to happen on the field. So you see a situation where those guys are doing high volume cash in, cash out, charging as high as 400 naira on 20,000 naira, and the banks are losing out on that income. So the pressure now is the banks are making the case to say, look, these guys are making so much money. We can't do the same because you don't allow us to do that. Why not? Let's have a fairly common policy. So when CBN is making the case that they are not increasing, they are only trying to break the monopoly. I think monopoly is not a fair word to use on POS operators, because all financial instrument or agency or service provider in Nigeria are regulated by CBN. So there is no way they can just act in a monopolistic manner without the CBN can easily control that. But I think what this is about is CBN just making a little bit of correction action around their policies to correct the cashless policy, allow people access to more cash, and allow them to do it through the banks. Because obviously people continue to do it with POS operators.
You know, the sharp practices, every time I go to an ATM these days, I always feel a bit frustrated. I first of all never expect to see cash. When you do, you are limited if you're using another bank card, you know, how much you can collect, and it will seem that you have to do it more frequently so that the bank can extort, in my own opinion, as much as they can from one transaction. If you want to withdraw like 50,000 naira, you have to do it as much as 5 times in some instances. Yeah. And I'm wondering what exactly is going on. When did we become like this? You know, it was never really like this. Yeah. Are you saying that with this new policy, with this correction that the CBN is doing, we should see things better at the ATM?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The banks, greed is the name of the game in business. And if you own a
greed,
bank, business. Every successful business must have an element of greed. You know, I like to tell people that there is nothing that is absolutely negative, and there is something that is absolutely positive. So in business, you need a good dose of greed to be successful. Hunger, thirst for success, acquire more than competition. It's greed grinding. Of course, businesses on a sustainable basis would need to have long-term goals and changes that they're determined and put all their mission and vision to achieve. But to get there, you need a dose of greed to be commercially viable. So as a bank, if you see that you have a much larger network, higher investment in brick and mortar, some of these ATM operators even come to the bank to withdraw money, sometimes even off their ATM, and then go sell it at a premium. So if you then look at that, it looks like these guys are winning you. They have one on you in the game of getting cash in the hands of customers. So it's only natural that banks would do a bit of pushback through the regulator, which is what they have done. If you observe, none of the banks have come publicly to address this. They've left all the talking to CBN, which is different from what the telcos are doing. You know, a number of them even started talking ahead of the regulator, which I think is an aberration. But for the banks, they just keep quiet, let CBN do all the talking, do all the adjustment, do the correction, and hopefully with these changes, we would see more cash now available in ATMs, back to almost a couple of years. And I think it's okay for CBN to do so, despite the gains, again, of cashless policy, which is a lot. The number of bank accounts, for example, in Nigeria has grown in the last 10 years from about 169 million to over 300 million. So, of course, it shows that, more and more people are getting on board opening bank accounts. And there are other indicators that confirm that the cashless policy has had some gains. But the cash in circulation continues to grow in spite of all the efforts and everything that's going on. So it's better to let people collect the money at the banks. It gives CBN better visibility, better tracking, better control of what's going on.
So it's finger crossed here. We'll see. You can tell us if your experience at the ATMs improve. That is what Mr. Ayeni is saying should happen as a result of this new tariff from the CBN on ATM withdrawals. So we have to say thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Elite this morning. Mr. Bosun Ayeni is a tech expert and also the CEO of Compumetric. Thank you so much for coming to Abuja Studios.
Thank you.